HDD. Today I have an interesting find that came to me. I was combing Reddit hardware swap for a 1660 Ti Super or even an RTX 2060 when a post I had caught the eye of someone who offered me a blast from the past. The guy had a Ryzen 1400 just sitting in a closet with some other parts. He offered the cost of shipping, already a score. I like collecting CPUs from the era, so of course I was interested. But then I had to ask the question, how good was this actually? And it just hit me like a blast. This chip had to compete with the 1500X, a higher clock version of itself, and let's not forget the champion at the time, the Ryzen 1600 with its 6-core, 12 threads. So competition was clearly fierce on its own lineup. It also had to deal with Intel's 8th gen lineup. They had finally added more cores with the i5-8400 6 cores, 6 threads, and the i7-8700K with its 6 cores and 12 threads would really hamper the relevancy of this chip. So the next question, who would use this chip? And the question after that, who is this chip geared towards? Did the extra 4 threads for the chip help it beat the future Zen Plus 2300X? Before we get into the benchmarks, let's get into the basics. The Ryzen 1400 was released on April 11th, 2017 with its 14nm process and modest 3.4 boost. It was a chip that ran rather cool and quiet. Overclocking at the time was simplified, but 300 series of motherboard and the fresh fickle nature of Ryzen Infinity Fabric made overclocking with RAM an unpredictable beast to mess with. So, stock was the common preference, which made sense for this chip. It was priced at $169, the cheapest simultaneous multi-threading you could get with the Ryzen lineup at the time. With cheaper chips like the 1300X being a 4-core 4-thread, it did have a higher boost clock of 3.7 GHz, but that didn't matter at the time when games were actually starting to utilize more threads. Think your Battlefield 1s, your Overwatch, more open world games. So what did most people play at this range? It was PUBG, an open world battle royale, the start of battle royales, the mother of all battle royales, and the other, esports. Overwatch was heavily popular at this time. But Overwatch was meant to run on garbage, potatoes, anything really, because it was built for people who did not want to spend a lot. There was also Siege, but Siege didn't really use CPU as GPU, and it could run on like a 1050 Ti. So to crunch it all down and compress it for you, it was a cheap chip at $169 for people who just wanted to come home and play games with no extra work. So let's see if that still holds true, and if it can compare to its newer architecture, the Zen Plus, that came out afterward. With this, we're going to see if architecture actually had a big difference at the time when Ryzen was still trying to crawl out of its market hole and beat Intel, with budget over performance. Okay, now that we've gotten to know the chip through our speed dating read-off, let's see how that games in 2025 and compares to, again, the Zen Plus 4-core 4 threads. The test rig being used is a B550 with Trident Z at 3200 MHz, and lastly, the budget king, the RTX 2070 Super, as I feel it's the most power you could achieve without bottlenecking in all games, right? Well, you may be surprised what still bottlenecked on this chip. Up first is a game Bethesda clearly did not care for, Starfield, or as I'm calling it, Starstruck, because the way the game has us stuck in place by how bad the optimization is can only be called that. The settings are on the low preset with DLSS set to quality, but the game still runs like a Windows presentation. Lowering the resolution scale in DLSS setting may fix the concussion slideshows, but not by much from what I've seen. Looks like the 2300X is taking a lead though, by an average of 10 to 15 FPS, though both still seem to suffer from freezing. Bethesda really outdid themselves with this game. Big launch, had everything going for it, and they fumbled. Who could have possibly seen this coming? Up next is Ark Ascended. This game seems to paint a big difference between the two CPUs. We're on the low preset as that's what someone will play this at on these CPUs. DLSS is set to quality. I tend to aim for that as it presents less blur around the edges, which is more preferable. So, the 1400 can score above 30 on average, but as seen by the 1% lows, it's gonna stutter as seen in the Forest Run. Very playable if you can keep your expectations low, like keep the bar in hell. But the game did feel smooth, and I could see someone enjoying this. However, if you happen to look at our Zen Plus CPU comparison, it seemed to score around 12 more FPS on average, while also keeping the 1% above 30. I'm thinking the higher stock boost may be helping, but if you look back at the 1400, however, it seems to not be in full usage, meaning if you would have more background programs, we would see the 1400 not losing as much or keeping its performance while the 2300X would stutter. On to the next game, Monster Hunter Wilds. This game uses a mix of GPU and CPU, which we can observe using the built-in benchmark with the medium preset. Both the 1400 and the 2300X are bottlenecking the GPU, with the 2300X being able to push out 10% more of the GPU's power. Though it seems the textures aren't loading in as fast on the 2300X. That may be due to the 4 megabytes instead of 8 megabytes of L3 cache the 2300X has. I'd also like to note that both these CPUs are working great on RAM clocked higher than they're designed for. 2666 is the design spec for the 1400 and 2933 is the design spec for the 2300X. Usually on Infinity Fabric, this would cause at best case program crashes, at worst case driver failure, blue screens, and if you're really unlucky, it could even corrupt Windows, calling for a new fresh install. I have many horror stories I'd love to tell everybody about me crashing my Windows on a Ryzen chip by using RAM that isn't on the QVL list or compatible with the motherboard. On the AM4 platform, ASRock actually typically did not like Corsair RAM, be it the Vengeance or the RGB. Despite being on that QVL list actually, it was kinda irritating the first time I found that out. With G-Skill being the most compatible RAM that would work typically across all boards I've used. If you are unsure which RAM your board allows for AM4, you simply just need to look up the name of the board, which you can find typically around the PCI slot, the first one, or even around the DIMM or RAM slots, depending on the board. Once you've reached the web page, just look for the support section and look for compatibility for MSI, CPU memory support for Asus, and look for the memory section, and you will be able to see all the RAM that is supported by your motherboard. Moving on, both these chips cannot hit 60 and will stutter at every new area loaded. I wouldn't suggest either CPU for a game that requires timed dodges and attacks, as the input lag from the stutters will inhibit those. There seems to be a pattern in performance difference that sees the 2300X winning yet another round with an average of 5 or more frames per second over the 1400. Rolling into our next title, Elden Ring. Elden Ring is a pretty good test for older CPUs as its open world nature feeds on a mostly CPU diet. We're playing on the maximum preset as playing on the lower preset sees us lose performance due to bottlenecking the 27 Super yet again. With this, we can see another win for the 2300X and its higher single core speed, or maybe the year-and-a-half difference for Zen Plus is really showing, with the difference being 12 frames per second on average between the two. So far we are seeing the 4 extra threads not helping the Ryzen 1400 win these little scuffles, though with a few more games to test, a comeback is still in the air. Stay tuned. Palworld is our next game to test, and we're running at the high settings with DLSS set to quality. The difference is much larger in this game as well. We see the 15 frames on average differences slapping the 1400 into a yet another loss. The 1400 of course showing its usage around 60%, while the 2300X sitting in the 80 to 90% region shows promise. Both chips seem to use more of the GPU in this test, which is a good thing to see. With an average of 67 for the 1400 and 82 for the 2300X, both are shown to be very playable, so it's very much dependent on what background programs need to be open. Now, Dead Island 2 showing up for yet another test. Reason being, I enjoy testing this game as it gives me the chance to jump kick zombies. Who doesn't like doing that? The arcade-like gameplay is very fun, and both chips run it well at a high preset. Though, we do see our biggest difference in performance with Dead Island. Counter is seeing an average of 35 in difference between the two chips, the 2300X winning. Wow, how much more games does the chip need to win before we just admit who the clear winner is? Well, then again, I don't want to see the 1400 lose yet, so let's try a few more games, as it's kind of turned into an underdog. Kingdom Come 2 is the next game being tested with the high preset as well as DLSS turned on with the quality preset. Both chips saw a playable average and would run the game well enough. It seems core speed might really be favored by Kingdom Come 2 as the 2300X has quite the lead over the 1400. With the 1400 getting around 56 on average and the 2300X getting 88 on average, it's looking grim for that first gen Ryzen. Though, on the bright side, the GPU seems to blend well with this game and it's pretty nifty how well it can run Kingdom Come 2, as Kingdom Come 1 was quite the benchmark when these chips had released. Lows are also good, and this would be a great game for budget gamers. Capcom's Black Sheep for 2023 is next. What game is that? Dragon's Dogma 2, of course. A lot of people were very hyped for this game, myself included, only to be giving one of the worst performing games on launch. Not Cyberpunk bad, but avoid the cities if you want a stable frame rate bad. So how does it perform on our CPUs? Well, the 1400 seems to struggle to hit 60 and sits around 38 on average, which would be fine except the lows hit 24 on average. Though we do see the 2300X with a much more exciting 52 average, but with only a slight increase of 3 on the lows department. Quite a case, though. I did not feel any stutters in the clips I'm showing off, so a budget gamer could enjoy this now. Still think the performance is below satisfactory, but it's better than launch, I suppose. Lastly, the game only has 2 graphic presets, so we stayed at the performance preset instead of the graphics preset. Capcom is interesting on how they do their presets. They don't do actual presets. They do performance heavy, graphics heavy, and then I think Resident Evil 4 Remake has a couple more settings, like if you want ray tracing. Quite an interesting setup. I haven't seen it done again, but I don't hate it, but it's definitely not the most optimal. Fortnite is flying in now, and on the performance mode, the high settings, we're seeing our biggest difference yet. The 2300X is sitting on high and mighty now on its horse, with its average around 130, while the 1400 is not even scraping 100. That's right, it can't even hit 100. The disparity in room is palpable. But moving on, you will see later after the game finishes loading its shaders, we do get our 100 average on the 1400, but the differences is still there. What's done is done. Fortnite is a great esports game to show off this kind of performance difference, and we can really see what game someone who only wants the games is going to pick the 2300X over. At the end, the numbers are the following: an average of 102 with a low of 6, yes, 6 whole FPS, but those are likely from the dropping in portion. While the 2300X has an average of 137 with a low of 19. 35 more frames on average is rough, but both suffered a stutterful landing. Higher core counts and speed like the 2600 would keep the 1% lows up. Also, the GPU hitting 30% on average is crazy. It wouldn't be a comparison without Cyberpunk 2077. How does it run on the CPUs? Well, at Alter, both can't maintain the 60 FPS they're meant to. The 2300X is close at 59, while the 1400 build trails behind at 50. Both keep respectable 1% lows. The true win is in this benchmark. There is one more game, and it's time to accept that the underdog is not taking this back. But we can see if the 1400 can close this gap. For our last benchmark, I chose the new Outer Worlds 2 game, sticking to a 2025 comparison, How do they do though? Well, on the low preset, they both cannot stick that 60 FPS average. Not surprising, seeing it's a newer game on the Unreal 5 engine. But they do see some playability with DLSS at quality. So there's that. This game has some improvements over the first. I've yet to see if they fix the repetitiveness of the landscapes and enemies, but the average are in. The 1400 got an average of 42 with a 1% low of 23. Not bad, given what kind of game this is and what it's running. Next we try the 2300X, and it comes in with an average of 49 and a 1% low of 32. So it is obviously beating the 1400 yet again. And with that, that is the last benchmark for the 1400 attempt to win. Truly a loss for it. If only there was a way to boost its speed to 3.9 gigahertz. See if it can match the 2300X in gaming. Okay, so if you didn't catch my drift, I'm going to overclock this 1400 to 3.9 as most, if not all Ryzen chips are left unclocked. After that, I will be testing Ark Ascended, Dragon's Dogma, and lastly, Outer Worlds 2 again to see those differences. So let's move on to the BIOS screen to start. Alright, so we've restarted the PC, hit delete until we got into the BIOS. We're going to go to the AI tweaker, and in this tab, you will go down to custom CPU core ratio and set it to manual. And using the FID, I set it to 154, which is small increments of 25 to set the target CPU speed. I was unable to get to 3.9, so I settled for 3.85. Then scroll down lower to VDD-CDR CPU voltage, leave it to offset mode for the easier overclocking, and go down to VDD-CDR CPU offset voltage. Okay, now I have mine set to 1.504. You don't need it this high. Typically around 1.45 is the highest you want to go. I only did 1.504 for educational purposes only. After that, we are done in here. We're going to save and changes and reset. And let's see what we get. So right back into it with Ark. And we see the 1400 getting a whopping, are you ready? 3 extra frames. So instead of 34, we are getting 37 frames on average. With no changes to the 1% lows, of course. Looks like the game itself cannot use as much as the 1400, which is good because the usage is down. So that means if you have background programs, they are less likely to stutter. Huzzah! Shame. I thought this would be the one we see shine, but don't worry, the next game might show something different. Now let's see if Dragon's Dogma 2 can show us any results. Oh wow, look at that. We are now pulling ahead of the 2300X. Looks like it did have some benefit after all. Who knew? With an old average of 41 and a 1% low of 25, we had quite a jump to 58 on average and 36, making the game very playable now. This now certifies the ship game ready for Dragon's Dogma. Quite a surprise, but can it hold it down for the next game? This is it, the final round. Can the 1400 pull the win and take the whole match for himself, or will he stay in the loser's bracket? Jokes aside, the Outer Worlds 2 is next, and can the 1400 surprise us in the newest game in our benchmark? And the answer is, well, okay, look at this. We are up to a matching 48 on average. So it's now on par with the 2300X after an overclock. The 1% lows are about the same, with a small margin for difference as it goes in this kind of business. So there you have it. Overclocking seems to help a little in some games and a lot in others. Most likely due to the single core performance, or it could be GPU usage. The 2300X still wins, but who knows, maybe if I tested more games we could see that difference. Let me know if you guys would want to see that in the comments. In conclusion, the 1400 is a very usable chip in 2025. It seems the 4 extra threads do help in small cases, but not enough to pick it over the 2300X. Moving on, I didn't reveal the price to keep the comparison fair, but I did get the 1400 for only $10. But typically, they both sell around $20 on eBay if you look at sold listings. To finish things off, I want to go into the 1400. It was a pretty cool chip back in the day. Like, it came out, nobody cared for it, but it was actually more effective than people think. You could have bought the 1500X for $20, so it's no surprise more people gravitated towards that chip. And then for 200, you got the 6-core, 12 threads. So why wouldn't you go for that? So with all that in mind, it's no wonder the 1400 was just left in the dust to rot, to just sit in the history of time. But it's a good chip. 4 cores, 8 threads. It'll blaze through a lot of games. You can play a lot of games. I didn't test it, but Borderlands 3 could be playable on this chip. There's a lot more games. So like I was telling you guys, if you want me to benchmark more games on the show, I definitely will. Just let me know in the comments. And I think that'll kind of do it for this. Thanks for watching. I'm going to do the FAQ and that's it. FAQ. Let's get into this. Should you pick either of these chips? Sure, if you're on a tight budget of $150 for a build, these could work well up to a 1660 Ti for a GPU. Would I ever flip a build with a 1400 in it? I actually have. In the past, I've flipped a few. Would I do it now? Sure would. Plenty of esports games are still popular, and these chips can run them easily, and would be great for that, or just general older games to play. There's plenty of old games in the library that you could be playing. You probably have some in your Steam library you never got to. Well, maybe this chip could be the one that gets you into it. On to our next question. What motherboards should you be pairing with this? Any A320 would work just fine. Dirt cheap boards would do fine. This is a 65 watt chip, so it just needs a working board. Just keep in mind though the RAM speeds and go no higher than 3000 for first gen boards. And it might even be lower, like 2666 might be the safe zone. But 3000 is typically where I find that they like to fight back. 4 core, 8 threads, or 6 core, 12 threads. Does that extra core matter? Very much so. The 1600 would beat this and have extra headroom for other activities while it's doing it. I will be doing a video on that soon actually, so tune in. With that, that'll be all the questions I have for today. Thanks for listening guys, and sayonara.